2 plus 2 equals 4. Everybody knows this, seems obvious. But what if you decided to convince yourself that 2 plus 2 equals 5? What if you use the most sophisticated model to find a way how to restructure the entire math to create such a scientific solution of why 2 plus 2 might be 5? And you can create the entire system that built on the false premises. And suddenly 2 plus 2 in your head is 5. And that's why artificial intelligence might be a little bit dangerous for us, because most of us don't care about the truth or don't care about an answer. We care how this truth makes us feel, how this answer makes us feel. And if it doesn't feel right, if it makes us feel bad, we try to reject it despite of evidence. And it doesn't matter that with the math 2 plus 2 equals 5, you weren't able to build bridges or build the planes that flies. It doesn't matter. What matters is your personal conviction that helps you to feel better, although you will never feel better. Why I'm talking about it? Because people nowadays like to create their own truth and propagate this truth online, across of the internet. They keep persisting in such an ideas that easily can be dismantled, because the premises of those ideas are incorrect. And I think it happens because on a certain point you take a wrong turn and without even knowing it got infected by such an idea that feels good and sounds right. But if you think carefully about this idea, you would understand that it's just fundamentally wrong. I like this argument, for example, about the rights. Why do we have rights? Because rights don't exist. We all agree that we should have such fundamental rights to live well. But rights are nothing without the force enforcing those rights. And that's a lot of people don't understand. And I really like Andrew Wilson's argument of force doctrine. It's really worth to explore, because rights themselves, they don't exist. There's no rights. But if you have enforcer behind the rights, behind this idea of rights, only then you can have them. And a strong enforcer can enforce different rights. I remember I read a lot of Christopher Hitchens, and I really love Christopher Hitchens, although he's atheist and I think he has such an ideas he got wrong, but I love Christopher Hitchens, incredibly intelligent man. And I think he, or maybe Richard Dawkins, they said stuff like, I don't need God to tell me not to kill. And I thought it kind of sounds right, but then when you think carefully about it, why kill is wrong? Why to kill somebody is wrong? Because if you step on this territory, you suddenly realize that there's no wrong and right, but thinking make it so. That's Shakespeare from Hamlet. Because everything comes into our thinking of what is right and what is wrong, and nothing else. And intelligent people are incredibly dangerous because they can reason their way out of everything. And intelligent people who has no mental and moral restraints, they usually go into the forest of ideology and try to create utopia by sacrificing millions of people. And we saw it across the world, like, for example, with communism. Incredibly intelligent people. They thought we can create great utopia where everybody is equal. But they never thought it through because people aren't born equal. Some parents, for example, are much more healthier than other parents, and some parents are much more cautious. Also, some parents build intergenerational wealth for their kids, and therefore they give their kids this better start. There's many factors affect people's life, and to assume that we just can build utopia while making everybody poor and miserable, it's incorrect. But come back to this intelligence and intelligent people. They can reason their way out of any atrocities. They can justify any atrocities because they know a bunch of words, and they can use those words to describe any idea as deeply as possible. I mean, sometimes they know what they're talking about, sometimes they don't. And this idea of rights, this idea, like when you ask people, why do you have rights? And everybody take it for granted. Everybody like, yeah, I have rights, but why do you have rights? Why do you think you deserve freedom? Why do you think you deserve certain things? Nobody can answer these questions because there's no answer. We just have the social contract and we agree that you have certain rights, I have certain rights, and we're supposed to maintain the social hygiene where we don't take each other's rights or don't hurt each other. And unfortunately, nowadays the social contract began crumbling because people, this new generation, they decided they need more rights. They decided they need everything for free. But then again, as Milton Friedman said, there's no free lunch, and there is not. And also like Thomas Sowell, who said, there's no victories but trade-offs. You always trade something for something. You cannot have it both. You cannot have a cake and eat it. You have to find what exactly do you want from life. And there comes another idea that you have to be careful with your reasoning, because you have to try to collaborate your mental reasoning with your life in general, because if something doesn't feel right, you have to think why it doesn't feel right. You have to ask yourself question, why do I think the way I think, and why it doesn't feel right? Because there's nothing worse than to have mental cognitive dissonance. Because when you have two opposite ideas fighting each other in your head and you try to ignore those two opposite ideas, that's kind of create mental disharmony, and in the end can drive you crazy. That's why I always try to find the ways to read a book, for example, to find the way to think carefully about those ideas that I have, because that it helps me to understand. I always have internal conversation with myself, trying to understand what do I want, what do I need, and why do I think I need this and not that, and why I think this way and not the other way, and why some things attract me and some things repulse me. Because it's very important to look within yourself and to understand why you operate the way you operate. Because if you take everything for granted, your life becomes just repetition of somebody else's ideas, somebody else's thought. Once you take responsibility for your own agency, then you suddenly realize, yes, I'm capable of everything because I'm in control of my own existence. And to be in control of your own existence doesn't mean to have a bunch of money and a bunch of power. If you have power over yourself, you have a control of your own existence. And your existence is all that matters. And then when you start respecting your own existence, you start respecting the existence of others. And you start reasoning in a different way. And then you try to find the solution how you can, for example, cooperate with other people in a more meaningful way, how you can contribute to society you live in a more meaningful way, what exactly you're capable of. Because riding around and screaming about inequality and about how everything is bad in the most prosperous and rich country on the planet doesn't make no sense. We have to take a look carefully at ourselves and try to learn to compare to other countries, because as Douglas Murray, when somebody tells me that America or the West is the worst, he always asks them compare to what? Because you cannot compare to something utopian. You have to compare to something that really exists, something that has a real base. Other country maybe, other structure. Because if you say the West is horrible compared to what? To what? To East, to Asia, to what exactly? Or America is horrible compared to what? To what other countries? And you have to know about the other countries. And not saying other countries are bad. There's good and bad things in each country, and we can have civil and intelligent dialogue among us. And we should do this because now we live in a fast-paced environment, and with artificial intelligence, evolution happening very fast.